I should have known the job was wrong the moment the key arrived without a return address. It came in a small ivory envelope, tucked between my electric bill and a grocery coupon I could not afford to use, with my name written across the front in dark blue ink. Emily Carter. No company logo, no phone number, just a brass key, a folded work order, and an address in Beacon Hill that everyone in Boston knew, but no one said too loudly. The Hayes estate sat behind 12-foot iron gates at the end of a private road lined with bare oak trees. By the time my cab turned onto the drive, rain was sliding down the windows in crooked silver lines, and the whole house looked like it had been carved out of storm clouds. I was 26 years old, a freelance art restorer with student loans, secondhand boots, and exactly $43 in my checking account. People like me did not get called to houses like that unless someone rich had either made a mistake or wanted one cleaned up. The guard at the gate studied my ID for so long my fingers tightened around the strap of my worn canvas bag. Then his radio crackled once, low and sharp, and the gates opened without a word. Inside, everything was too quiet. The mansion had marble floors the color of old bones, ceilings high enough to swallow sound, and chandeliers that glowed like trapped stars. A woman in a black suit led me through the foyer without introducing herself. Her heels clicked. Mine squeaked. I hated that I noticed. I hated more that every man we passed seemed to know my face already. They stood near doorways, by windows, at the bottom of staircases, all dressed in dark suits, all watching without staring. That was when I understood the rumors were not rumors. Alexander Hayes did not just own hotels, shipping companies, and half the restaurants on the North End. He owned silence. The woman stopped at the end of the eastern hallway, where the air felt colder by at least 10 degrees. The walls here were bare, no family photos, no mirrors, no warmth. Just one black door with a brass lock polished from use, even though the rest of the corridor looked abandoned. She handed me a clipboard. "You have 3 hours," she said. "Restore only what is listed." Before I could ask a question, she turned and walked away, leaving me with the rain tapping against the tall windows and my own breathing sounding embarrassingly loud. The work order had one room circled in red ink. East Gallery. I looked at the key in my palm. It fit perfectly. The lock turned with a soft, final click, like something agreeing to wake up. Dust breathed out when I opened the door. The room beyond was dark, long, and freezing, with covered frames lining the walls like ghosts waiting under white sheets. My flashlight swept over stacked crates, velvet ropes, a cracked skylight, and one large portrait at the far end of the gallery. It was not leaning with the others. It stood upright, facing the door, draped in white cloth from top to floor, as if someone had wanted it hidden but not forgotten. I should have started with the inventory tags. I should have checked the lighting, the humidity, the condition report. Instead, I walked toward it. Every step made the floor whisper beneath me. When I reached the portrait, my hand hesitated on the cloth. I do not know why my heart was beating so hard. It was only canvas, only pigment, only wood. That was what I told myself right before I pulled the cover down. The woman underneath looked back at me with pale blue eyes and a sorrow so human I forgot how to breathe. She had ash blonde hair pinned at her neck, one hand resting over a silver locket, and the expression of someone who had smiled for the painter while begging with her eyes. At the bottom corner, half hidden beneath dust, was a name written in a delicate hand. Vivian Hayes. Then the room changed. No alarm screamed. No lights flashed. But somewhere inside the walls, something clicked. A thin red glow appeared above the door. I turned, my stomach dropping, and saw the black door lock itself from the outside. A voice came from the shadows behind me, low, calm, and close enough to freeze the air in my lungs. "Who told you to touch my mother's portrait?" For one terrible second, I could not move. The cloth lay in a pale heap at my feet, the portrait stared past my shoulder, and the man in the doorway looked like every warning I had ever ignored dressed in a black tailored suit. Alexander Hayes was taller than I expected, maybe 6'3", with dark blonde hair combed back from a face too controlled to be kind. His eyes were the same blue as the woman in the painting, only colder, sharpened by years of never letting the world see where it had hurt him. 3 men stood behind him, silent and still, but they did not frighten me as much as the way he did not raise his voice. "I asked you a question," he said. "Who told you to touch her?" My hand tightened around the folded work order. No one told me to touch anything personal. I was hired to restore pieces in the East Gallery. His gaze moved to the paper like it had offended him. No one is hired for this room. Then someone made a mistake. People around me do not make mistakes, Miss Carter. Hearing my name in his mouth sent a cold thread down my spine. I forced myself to breathe through it. My identification was checked at the gate. Your staff let me in. I have a contract number, a key, and written instructions. I held out the work order because proof had always protected me in ordinary places. In banks, in museums, in offices where men wore name tags instead of power. Alexander took the paper between two fingers, read it once, and something almost invisible shifted in his face. Not surprise. Something worse. Recognition. Then he tore it cleanly in half. The sound was soft, but it seemed to travel through the whole gallery. That was my only copy, I whispered. This room has been sealed for 12 years. The words landed harder than shouting could have. I looked past him to the red light glowing above the door, then back to the portrait. 12 years. But the brass lock had turned easily. The floor had not been disturbed except by my own footprints. The dust on the white cover had been thin, too thin for a room nobody entered. That cannot be true, I said before I could stop myself. His eyes narrowed. Careful. I am being careful. I restore art for a living. I notice what people miss. His stare held mine, and for a moment, every sound disappeared except the rain ticking against the skylight. Then notice. This, he said quietly. You are standing in a room that does not exist on any public floor plan, holding a key no employee has access to, beside a portrait my family was ordered never to uncover. My throat went dry. Ordered by whom? The men behind him shifted, barely, but Alexander did not. He looked at the painting again, and for the first time, the coldness cracked. It was small, a fracture in his breathing, a flicker of pain crossing his mouth before power covered it. That is not your concern. It became my concern when your door locked behind me. He stepped closer, not fast, not threatening, just close enough for me to smell rain, cedar, and expensive wool. You should be more afraid than you are. I am afraid, I said, and my voice embarrassed me by shaking. I am just also telling the truth. His gaze dropped to my hands. Paint dust lined my fingers. I had not even noticed. Truth is expensive in this house. Then somebody paid for mine in advance. He looked back at me sharply. I reached into my bag with slow, careful fingers and pulled out the ivory envelope. This came to my apartment this morning. No return address. Just the key and the order. One of the men moved as if to take it, but Alexander lifted one hand, and the man stopped instantly. That was when I understood what real command looked like. It did not need volume. It only needed obedience. Alexander took the envelope himself. The moment he saw the handwriting, all color left his face. For 3 seconds, he was not the man who owned half of Boston. He was only a son staring at a ghost. Where did you get this? He asked, but the question sounded different now. Less like an accusation, more like fear dressed as control. I told you. It was mailed to me. His thumb brushed over the ink of my name, and his jaw tightened. This is impossible. Why? He did not answer. He turned the envelope toward the portrait, toward the woman with the sorrowful blue eyes and the silver locket beneath her hand. Then he said the thing that made the room feel suddenly too small for all of us. Because my mother wrote like this. The words stayed in the air longer than they should have. Because my mother wrote like this. Alexander said it as if the sentence had cost him something, as if every syllable had been pulled from a place he never allowed anyone to touch. I looked from his face to the envelope, then to the portrait behind me. Vivian Hayes watched us from the canvas with those pale blue eyes, calm and wounded, and suddenly the room felt less like a gallery and more like a confession waiting for the right witness. Your mother? I asked softly. His fingers closed around the envelope. Do not make me repeat myself. The warning was quiet, but I heard the strain beneath it. He was not angry because I had touched the portrait. He was angry because the portrait had touched him first. I swallowed and forced my attention back to what I understood. Art did not lie the way people did. Paint remembered pressure. Canvas remembered time. Varnish kept secrets, but only until someone knew where to look. The writing may look like hers, I said, choosing each word carefully. But that does not mean she sent it. She has been gone 12 years. Then someone wants you to believe she did. His eyes cut to mine. The men near the door went still again. I hated how my pulse jumped. but I did not step back. I turned toward the portrait and lifted my flashlight. May I show you something? Alexander said nothing. Somehow, that felt like permission. I moved closer to the canvas, keeping my hands visible. The varnish had yellowed with age across the dress, the locket, the pale curve of Vivian's hand. But around the eyes, the surface caught the light differently. Softer, duller, wrong. I leaned in until my breath almost touched the paint. This area was altered. Alexander came to stand beside me, close enough that the room seemed to narrow around his silence. Altered when? Recently. His jaw tightened. That is impossible. You keep saying that. I opened my small restoration kit and took out a cotton swab. Old oil paint hardens in layers. New paint behaves differently. It has a different sheen, especially under angled light. Touch it carefully. I was planning to. My voice came out steadier than I felt. I dampened the swab with solvent, barely enough to soften the top layer, then touched it to the corner of Vivian's left eye. A faint blue-gray stain lifted at once. Too fast. Too fresh. I heard one of the men inhale behind us. Alexander did not move, but the air around him changed. I wiped again, slower this time. The newer pigment thinned, revealing a darker line beneath it. Not shadow. Not brushwork. Ink. My heart began to pound. There is something under here. A signature? No. I worked another half-inch, my hand trembling despite every year of training I had forced into my bones. More letters surfaced beneath the false paint, small and uneven, hidden inside the lower curve of the eye where only a restorer would find them. A message, not painted for the world, painted for one person. Alexander's breathing changed before the words were fully visible. Maybe he recognized the shape. Maybe grief does that. Maybe it learns to read before the mind is ready. I stepped back, the swab stained blue between my fingers. Under Vivian's painted eye, delicate and broken, the hidden words appeared. Alexander, forgive me. No one spoke. Rain tapped the cracked skylight above us like a clock counting down. Alexander stared at the message, and for the first time since he entered the room, he looked young. Not weak. Not soft. Just suddenly stripped of the armor everyone else feared. His hand lifted toward the canvas, then stopped before touching it. She never asked me for forgiveness, he whispered. I barely heard him. She left before she could. Then his eyes shifted to the lower edge of the frame, where the old wood had separated slightly from the backing. A sliver of ivory paper peeked from inside, so thin I would have missed it if the flashlight had not caught the corner. I reached toward it, but Alexander caught my wrist. Not hard, just fast enough to stop me. His eyes were locked on the paper. Do not, he said. Why? His voice dropped until it was almost nothing. Because if that is what I think it is, this house has been lying to me my entire life. Alexander did not release my wrist at first. His fingers were controlled, not cruel, but I could feel the force he was holding back, the kind of force that had less to do with strength and more to do with fear. The thin piece of ivory paper remained trapped beneath the frame, barely visible, waiting like it had waited for 12 years. I looked at his hand around my wrist, then at his face. I will not pull it out unless you ask me to. His eyes moved to mine. For one breath, I thought he might order everyone out, lock the gallery again, bury the message, and pretend none of this had happened. Men like him could do that. Men like him could make entire truths disappear under polished floors and family names. But grief is not an empire. It does not obey. His hand fell away. You should know what she was, he said. The words were flat, practiced, worn smooth from being repeated too many times. My mother was not the woman in that painting. I stayed silent. Sometimes silence is the only way to keep a door open. Alexander turned from the frame and walked a few steps into the center of the gallery. The red alarm light painted one side of his face in a faint, unnatural glow. Vivian Hayes was beautiful, educated, admired, and restless. That is what I was told. She married my father for his name, hated the life, hated the rules, hated the son who tied her to both. His mouth tightened. I was 7 when she left. The rain struck the skylight harder. I could see him as a boy without wanting to. A child in a mansion too large for comfort, waiting at the top of stairs for a woman who never came back. They told you she abandoned you, I said. They did more than tell me. His voice remained calm, but something cold moved underneath it. They preserved her absence like a lesson. Her rooms were sealed. Her photographs removed. Her name became a warning. Every time I hesitated, every time I trusted the wrong person, my uncle reminded me that softness was the disease she left behind. Richard Hayes, the name from the outline of this house, from the staff who lowered their voices when certain doors opened. I had not met him yet, but suddenly I felt him everywhere. In the locked gallery, in the covered portrait, in Alexander's careful emptiness. And your father? I asked. Alexander looked at the portrait. He died 2 years after she did, after she left. He did not answer right away. That silence told me more than words. After the fire, he said finally. The official story was simple. She ran to a man from another family. There was a house outside Providence. A storm. An accident. No body they could show a child. Just a closed casket and my uncle's hand on my shoulder, telling me not to cry for a woman who had chosen disgrace. My throat tightened. The woman in the painting did not look like disgrace. She looked like someone trying to hold on to the last honest thing she had. I turned back to the canvas, studying the angle of her hand over the silver locket. It was too deliberate. Not decorative. Protective. Alexander, I said carefully, what did the locket look like? His eyes sharpened. Why? Because painters do not hide messages only in words. I lifted the flashlight and aimed it at Vivian's hand. The locket was oval, silver, with a tiny engraved branch across the front. Below it, near the edge of her sleeve, the varnish had darkened around something raised beneath the paint, a small shape the size of a child's bracelet. I leaned closer and felt my pulse stumble. There is more under this layer. Alexander returned to my side, so quietly I barely heard him. What kind of more? I touched the edge with the clean end of a brush, not scraping, only testing the surface. A faint ridge appeared beneath the dust. Not paint. Metal pressed behind the canvas backing. Something was placed inside the frame before it was sealed. His face changed. Not much. Just enough. A memory reaching him before he could stop it. I had a bracelet, he said, barely above a whisper. Silver. My mother said it was so I would always know where I belonged. The gallery seemed to inhale. I looked at the ivory paper, at the hidden ridge, at the woman who had been turned into a warning by people who feared what she had left behind. Then maybe she did not leave you, I said. Alexander's eyes stayed on the portrait, but his voice came out broken at the edges. Do not give me that hope unless you can prove it. That was when the doorknob turned from the outside, slow and deliberate, and an older man's voice said, through the wood, Alexander, step away from the painting. The voice on the other side of the door did not sound surprised. That frightened me more than if it had. Alexander went still beside me, and every man in the gallery seemed to take his silence as an order not yet spoken. The red light above the door blinked once, then vanished. The lock released with a soft mechanical sigh, and the black door opened inward. Richard Hayes stepped into the east gallery as if he owned the air before he breathed it. He was in his early 60s, silver-haired, perfectly dressed, with the polished calm of a man who had spent a lifetime turning secrets into furniture and placing them exactly where guests would not look. His eyes moved over me first, not with curiosity, with assessment. Then they found the portrait, the stained cotton swab in my hand, the exposed words beneath Vivian's painted eye, and the thin piece of ivory paper still caught beneath the frame. For the first time since I had arrived, I saw someone in that house truly afraid. He covered it quickly. Men like him always did. This room is restricted, Richard said. So I have heard. I answered before I could stop myself. Alexander did not look at me, but I felt the smallest shift beside me, like he had almost smiled and hated himself for it. Richard's gaze sharpened. Miss Carter, your services are no longer required. You will be compensated for your time and escorted home. She is not going anywhere, Alexander said. His voice was quiet, but the room obeyed it. Richard looked at his nephew with practiced disappointment. You are emotional. That is a word people use when they want a man to ignore evidence. The older man sighed, smooth and tired, as if Alexander were a difficult child rather than the most powerful person in the room. That painting was sealed for a reason. Your mother left enough damage behind. Do not let a stranger dig through it for profit. My face warmed, but I kept my hand steady. I am not digging for profit. Richard turned to me. Then what are you digging for? I looked at the message under Vivian's eye. Alexander, forgive me. The truth, I said. Richard's expression hardened by one invisible degree. Truth is rarely kind. Lies are not kind either. They are just quieter. The gallery seemed to shrink around that sentence. Alexander finally turned to his uncle. How did she get the key? Richard did not blink. Obviously someone in restoration sent the wrong packet. No outside firm knew this room existed. Then someone on staff made an error. You told me people around us do not make mistakes. For a moment, Richard had no answer. Rain traced silver lines down the cracked skylight, and I noticed his hand resting near his coat pocket, not reaching, just guarding something. A habit. A tell. My eyes dropped. He saw me see it. That was when he smiled. Miss Carter is observant. That does not make her trustworthy. Alexander stepped half a pace between us. Not dramatic. Not possessive. Protective in a way that made the men by the door lower their eyes. Say what you came to say. Richard's attention returned to the portrait. Destroy it. The words were so calm that I almost missed their cruelty. Alexander did not move. No. Then store it somewhere she cannot touch it again. No, Richard's polished calm cracked. You have no idea what Vivian hid in that frame. Then tell me. Silence. There it was. The hole in the story. The place where a lie had been holding its breath for 12 years. I looked back at the frame, at the loosened backing, at the ivory paper waiting beneath the old wood. If Richard feared it that much, then it mattered more than the painting, more than the message, maybe more than the memory of Vivian herself. I reached for my smallest tool, but Richard's voice snapped through the cold air. Do not remove that. Alexander looked at him. Why? Richard's mouth tightened. Because some things, once opened, cannot be closed again. I slid the tool beneath the backing anyway, slow and careful, my heart hammering so loudly I could barely hear the rain. The ivory paper came free with a whisper. Folded once. Sealed with a faded blue wax stamp. On the front, written in the same delicate hand as the envelope, were two words that drained every trace of color from Alexander's face. My son. Richard stepped back. Just one step. But it told me everything. Alexander took the letter from my hand as if it might disappear. His thumb brushed the wax seal, and his voice came out lower than the storm. You knew? Richard said nothing. Alexander looked at the portrait, then at the man who had raised him on a story built from ashes and silence. All these years, you knew she left me something. Richard's eyes turned cold again. I knew she left you weakness. Alexander broke the seal. If this emotional mafia romance story has pulled you in, like this video, and comment what you think Vivian was truly trying to protect. Keep watching until the end, because this hidden family secret is only beginning to unfold, and Emily Carter may discover that Alexander Hayes is not the only one connected to the portrait. The wax seal broke with a soft crack that sounded too loud in the frozen room. Alexander unfolded the letter slowly, as if one wrong movement could turn the paper to dust. Richard watched him with a face carved out of warning, but he did not step forward. None of the men did. Even the rain seemed to quiet against the skylight. Alexander read the first line, and his hand tightened around the page. I could not see the words, only the effect of them. The way his shoulders locked. The way his breath stopped halfway in. The way a man who had built his life on control suddenly looked like control had become the last thing holding him upright. Richard spoke first. Alexander, you need to think before you let an old letter poison what is left of this family. Alexander did not look up. You should have burned it if you were innocent. Richard's mouth thinned. I protected you. No, Alexander said, still staring at the letter. You edited me. The words cut through the gallery without volume. I looked at Vivian's portrait, at the painted locket, at the hidden message beneath her eye, and felt the strange, heavy certainty that this was not the end of the secret. It was only the first door. Alexander folded the letter and slipped it inside his jacket. Miss Carter is coming with me. Richard's eyes moved to me. That would be unwise. Most truths are. Alexander turned toward the door. Open the west. Library. One of his men left immediately. I followed because staying near Richard felt worse than following Alexander into the unknown. My legs were steady until we reached the hallway. Then the cold left me all at once, and my knees nearly forgot their job. Alexander noticed. Of course he did. Are you hurt? No, afraid. I almost lied, but the house had already swallowed enough lies. Yes. His gaze softened for less than a second. Good. Fear keeps honest people careful. The West Library was hidden behind a wall of dark wood shelves and old legal books that no one had touched in years. One guard pressed a brass button beneath a marble bust, and the shelves opened without a sound. Behind them was a smaller room with no windows, warmer than the gallery, filled with locked cabinets, file boxes, and the faint smell of paper, cedar, and dust. Alexander closed the door behind us. The silence changed. It no longer felt empty. It felt protected. "Why am I here?" I asked. He placed Vivian's letter on the desk between us. "Because my uncle was afraid of you before you touched the frame. He was afraid of the letter." "No," Alexander said. "He was afraid of your name." My fingers went cold. "Carter." He opened the top drawer and removed an old leather folder stamped with the Hayes family crest. Inside were photographs, hospital forms, newspaper clippings, and yellow documents held together with a silver clip. He searched through them with precise, impatient hands until he found a birth certificate. He turned it toward me. The name at the top read Vivian Rose Carter. For a moment, the room tilted. I stared at the paper, waiting for the letters to rearrange themselves into something less impossible. They did not. "That could be a coincidence," I whispered. "It could be." His voice was quiet. "But you do not believe that." I thought of my father, Daniel Carter, who had raised me in a small apartment outside Worcester with 3 locks on the door and no photographs from before I was born. I thought of the way he used to go silent whenever old Boston families appeared on the evening news. I thought of the locked metal box in his closet that he told me never to open, even after he got sick. My throat tightened. "My father knew your family." Alexander watched me carefully, not accusing. "Not yet." "Did he ever mention my mother?" No, the answer came too fast. Too frightened. Because he had not mentioned her, but he had warned me once, years ago, when I had been accepted into an art conservation program downtown. "Stay away from the Hayes name, Emily. Some houses do not let people leave clean." I had thought he meant money, power, bad history. Now I was not sure he had been speaking in metaphor. A knock sounded behind the hidden door, 3 soft taps. One of Alexander's men entered and bent close to him, speaking low. I caught only a few words. "Driveway. Miss Carter's cab. Brake line cut clean." My stomach dropped. Alexander's face went still in that terrifying way powerful men use when anger becomes decision. He looked at me, and whatever distance he had kept between us vanished. "You are not leaving this house tonight." I stepped back. "You cannot keep me here." "I am not keeping you." He picked up Vivian's letter and the folder with my name folded into its silence. "I am keeping them from reaching you before we understand why my dead mother sent for a Carter girl." For a few seconds, all I could hear was the blood moving in my ears. My cab sat somewhere beyond those rain-dark windows with a cleanly damaged brake line, and Alexander Hayes stood between me and the door with his mother's letter in one hand and my last name in the other. I wanted to be brave. I wanted to tell him that I could handle myself, that I had survived debt collectors, hospital waiting rooms, empty refrigerators, and grief without a man in a tailored suit deciding when I was safe. But the truth was simpler and colder. Someone had known I was coming before I did. Someone had let me into a sealed room. Someone had waited until I found the message, then made sure I could not leave easily. "I need to call my apartment," I said. Alexander studied me. "Why?" "Because my father left a metal box in my closet. I never opened it." His eyes sharpened. "You mentioned that before. I thought it was old tax papers, maybe photographs." He was sick the last year of his life. He kept saying there were things I did not need to carry. My voice dropped. Now I think he meant things he was afraid to explain. Alexander nodded once to the man by the hidden door. "Send 2 people. No uniforms. No sirens. Bring the box here unopened." I should have argued. I should have insisted on going with them. Instead, I sat in the leather chair across from the desk because my legs had started to tremble. The West Library smelled of old money and older secrets. Alexander stood by the shelves, reading his mother's letter again under the amber lamp. His face did not change, but his silence did. It deepened. It became heavier. "What does it say?" I asked. For a long moment, I thought he would refuse. Then he placed the letter on the desk and turned it toward me. The handwriting was elegant but uneven, as if Vivian had written in a hurry or with a shaking hand. "My son, if this ever reaches you, then someone found the courage I could not buy with all the Hayes money in the world. I did not leave because I stopped loving you. I left because staying would have taught you to confuse fear with respect." My throat tightened. Alexander looked away, but not before I saw the pain cross his eyes. I kept reading. "I trusted Daniel Carter with the truth because he was the only honest man your father ever hired. He promised to protect the evidence until the right time, and if he ever has a daughter, I pray she grows up with the courage this house tried to take from me. The room seemed to tilt again, but this time the floor did not catch me. Daniel Carter. My father. Not blood. Not family. An honest man hired by monsters and punished by memory. He worked for your father, I whispered. Alexander's gaze returned to me, cautious and dark. Apparently. The hidden door opened 30 minutes later, though it felt like 3 hours. One of Alexander's men entered carrying the metal box I had avoided for 6 years. It was smaller than I remembered, scratched along the edges, with my father's initials etched into the handle. DC. My hand shook so badly Alexander reached for the box first, then stopped. It is yours, he said. That small restraint did something strange to me. In a house full of men who took, he waited for permission. I unlocked it with the tiny key still taped inside my wallet, where my father had told me to keep it when I was 19. Inside were old photographs, a cassette tape, a stack of legal pages, and a hospital bracelet wrapped in tissue paper. Silver. Child-sized. Engraved with 2 letters. H. Alexander did not touch it. He only stared, his face going pale under the lamplight. Beneath the bracelet was a photograph of Vivian standing beside a much younger version of my father outside a small white house near the coast. She held a suitcase. He held a folder. Both of them looked terrified. On the back, my father had written 4 words. She tried to save him. Alexander picked up the photograph at last, careful as prayer. Save who? I asked, though I already knew. His answer came out rough, almost soundless. Me. Then I found one final envelope at the bottom of the box. It was addressed to me in my father's handwriting. Emily, if the Hayes boy ever finds you, do not run from him. Run from the man who raised him. I stared at my father's envelope until the ink blurred. Emily, if the Hayes boy ever finds you, do not run from him. Run from the man who raised him. The sentence made the library feel smaller, as if the walls had leaned in to hear what I would do next. Alexander stood across from me, silent, the silver bracelet resting on the desk between us like a piece of childhood that had survived everyone who tried to erase it. Open it, he said softly. Not an order this time. A request. I slid my finger beneath the flap and unfolded 3 pages written in my father's careful hand. My father had always written grocery lists like legal statements, straight lines, perfect spacing, no wasted words. But this letter was different. The letters leaned. Some words pressed deeper into the paper, as if his hand had shaken while writing them. Emily, I need you to know I did not betray her. I betrayed my fear. Vivian Hayes came to me in September with a suitcase, a child's bracelet, and documents proving Richard Hayes had arranged for her to be declared unstable so no one would believe her. She wanted her son out of that house before they turned him into his father. My breath caught. Alexander looked away, one hand closing around the edge of the desk. I kept reading because stopping felt crueler. She had a plan. A safe house in Maine. A new name. A trust account for the boy. But Richard found out before she could reach Alexander. He gave the world a fire because fire leaves fewer questions than a missing woman. I looked up, horrified, but Alexander's face had gone impossibly still. Not empty. Too full. Like if he moved, everything inside him would spill out. There was no accident, he said. His voice did not break, but something in the room did. My uncle made her into a story. I swallowed hard and returned to the letter. I kept the bracelet because Vivian asked me to. I kept the papers because she said one day the boy would need proof that his mother loved him more than she feared them. But I was young. I had a wife. Then I had you. And every year I waited. The Hayes house grew stronger, and my courage grew smaller. I am sorry. Not all cowardice looks like running. Sometimes it looks like staying quiet long enough for a child to become a stranger to the truth. My hands were shaking so badly the paper whispered between my fingers. My father carried this for decades, I said. He carried guilt, Alexander answered. There is a difference. I expected bitterness in his voice. There was none, only exhaustion. He reached for Vivian's letter and unfolded it beside my father's. 2 dead people, 2 different hands. One truth finally breathing on the same desk. Alexander read the final line of his mother's letter aloud, barely above a whisper. If my son ever becomes his father, let the Carter girl remind him who he was before the blood. He stopped there. His eyes closed. The powerful man vanished so quietly I almost missed it. In his place stood a boy who had been taught to hate the only woman who had tried to save him. His hand rose to his mouth, then dropped. He turned away from me, shoulders rigid, breath caught behind his teeth. He did not cry. Somehow that was worse. "Alexander," I said gently. He shook his head once, not to silence me, but to hold himself together. "I spent 12 years proving I did not need her," he said. 12 years becoming the kind of man this family could use. His laugh was quiet and empty, and she spent her last freedom trying to keep me from exactly that. I stepped closer, slow enough that he could move away if he wanted. He did not. "Then do not let Richard have the last word." His eyes opened and found mine. The coldness was still there, but beneath it something else had begun to burn. Not rage. Choice. "He will deny everything." "Then we do not give him a conversation," I said, looking at the letters, the bracelet, the photograph, the legal pages. "We give him proof." For the first time that night, Alexander looked at me not like a problem, not like a witness, but like the answer to a question his mother had left unfinished. Then the library intercom clicked on, and Richard's voice filled the hidden room, smooth as polished stone. "Alexander, whatever she has shown you, remember who gave you this life." Alexander picked up the bracelet, closed it in his palm, and looked toward the sealed door. "That is exactly what I am remembering." Alexander did not answer Richard through the intercom. He simply gathered the letters, the photograph, the legal documents, and the silver bracelet, then placed them all in my hands as if the truth had chosen a safer place to stand. "Stay beside me," he said, "not behind me." I looked at him then, really looked at him, and understood the difference. He was not asking me to be protected like something fragile. He was asking me to witness him while he stopped becoming the man they had designed. The hidden door opened, and we stepped back into the main hall where the house waited in polished silence. Men in dark suits lined the walls, but no one moved. No one spoke. They all watched Alexander the way people watch a storm decide whether it will pass or change the map. Richard stood at the foot of the grand staircase, one hand resting on the rail, his silver hair perfect, his expression calm enough to fool anyone who had not seen fear enter his eyes in the gallery. "This is unnecessary," he said. Alexander walked toward him with measured steps. So was teaching a child to hate his mother. The words moved through the foyer like cold air under a locked door. Richard's gaze flicked to me, then to the folder in my arms. "You are letting an outsider poison you with old paper." "No," Alexander said. "I am letting my mother speak." For the first time, Richard's calm broke in public. Only a little. Only around the mouth. But everyone saw it. Alexander took the silver bracelet from my palm and held it up beneath the chandelier light. The tiny letters caught gold and threw it back. She kept this," he said. "She hid proof. She trusted Daniel Carter because she knew the men in this house would bury her voice if they could." Richard lowered his voice. "Think carefully, Alexander. You are the head of this family because I made sure you survived." Alexander looked at him for a long time. "No, I survived because my mother loved me before you taught me to call love weakness." No one breathed. Or maybe I only stopped hearing it. Alexander turned to the men along the wall, the same men who had opened gates, guarded doors, carried silence like a uniform. "Every document in this folder goes to my attorneys tonight. Every account tied to Richard Hayes is frozen by morning. Every person in this house who helped hide what happened to Vivian Hayes will have one chance to tell the truth before someone else tells it for them." Richard's face went pale. "You would tear apart your own family?" Alexander looked at Vivian's portrait, now visible through the open gallery doors at the end of the hall. Her painted eyes seemed softer from a distance, as if the house itself had finally run out of lies to place over them. "No," he said. "I am ending what tore it apart." He did not shout. He did not threaten. He did not become the monster Richard expected him to be. That was the part that stayed with me later. Power had always sounded loud in my imagination. That night, it sounded like restraint. Richard was escorted from the foyer by men who no longer looked at him for permission. His polished shoes crossed the marble floor without ceremony, and the door closed behind him with a final, ordinary sound. No thunder, no screaming, just an ending that had waited 12 years to be allowed into the room. When it was over, Alexander stood beneath the chandelier, holding his mother's bracelet in his closed fist. Everyone waited for his next command, but he turned to me instead. "Your father should have told the truth sooner," he said. "Mine should have been allowed to." I felt tears burn behind my eyes, but I did not let them fall. They both left it for us. He nodded slowly, and something in his face changed. Not healed. Not yet. Healing was not a door that opened all at once. It was a hallway. A long one. But for the first time since I had entered the Hayes estate, Alexander looked less like a man built from locked rooms and more like someone searching for a window. Later, before dawn, we returned to the East Gallery. The rain had stopped. Gray light slipped through the cracked skylight and touched Vivian's portrait like a blessing. Alexander stood beside me, silent, the bracelet resting on the frame below her painted hand. "She sent you here to save me from my enemies," he said. I looked at the hidden words beneath Vivian's eye, still delicate, still true. "No," I whispered. "She sent me here to remind you that you were never born to become one." He did not answer, but his silence was different now. It no longer ruled the room. It listened. If this emotional mafia romance story moved you, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and comment your thoughts about Emily Carter, Alexander Hayes, and the hidden family secret that changed everything. Did Vivian make the right choice? And could Alexander truly break free from the Hayes legacy? Turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next powerful mafia boss romance, secret past story, emotional love story, and cinematic family betrayal twist. Keep watching the next video on the channel for another unforgettable journey. Thank you for being here, and I promise the next story will reveal an even deeper secret.